That morning, I walked into the conference room with a feeling of excitement. After 17 years of missed anniversaries, unanswered calls, and nights spent under the glare of fluorescent lights, this is my moment. I looked around the room. The contracts sat neatly stacked on the polished mahogany table, cameras already poised to capture history. My pulse quickened as I pictured phoning my daughter later, hearing the pride in her voice when I told her we had secured the $1.3 billion deal. Her message from earlier still lingered like a warm echo. Mom, today will be your day. But before I could take my seat, Nathan Hale stepped into my path. His suit gleamed under the lights, his smile taut, rehearsed. Claire from HR hovered just behind him, clutching a manila folder to her chest as if it were a decree. "Elin," Hale said, voice low and unyielding. "Your time here has ended. Please hand over your badge." For an instant, the words didn't register. They hung in the air. Absurd. Impossible. Like a cruel joke delivered in the wrong room. I looked around the investors chatting quietly, the attorneys flipping through their notes, the cameras adjusting lenses. Surely this was a mistake. I wanted to ask how you are today, and where are you listening from as you follow this story if it resonates with you. Tap the like button and hit follow so you won't miss the next part. Your support means the world. A hush fell over the room, the kind of silence that suffocates. Faces turned toward me, waiting for a reaction. My chest tightened as my eyes found Mark, the colleague who had once promised, "I'll always stand with you." He lowered his head, busying himself with papers he didn't need to touch. His silence cut deeper than Hale's words. And then came the sound that seared itself into me, a laugh. Quick, muffled, careless. One of the younger analysts by the wall hadn't caught himself in time. It echoed like a crack of glass across the floor. The humiliation burned through me, hotter than rage ever could. My fingers fumbled with my badge. It felt suddenly heavier than it had any right to be, weighted with years of sacrifice. I placed it on the table with deliberate care, willing my hand to stay steady. No words escaped me. Silence, I realized, was the only dignity I still owned. Hale turned back to the investors with a thin smile, already erasing me from the frame. I lifted my chin, swallowed the ache rising in my throat, and walked out carrying nothing but shock, humiliation, and my daughter's hopeful words now curdled into sorrow. The moment the badge left my hand, the boardroom no longer felt like mine. I could feel the walls themselves pushing me out, the polished table shrinking behind me as I turned away. My footsteps echoed too loudly on the marble floor, each step a reminder that I was no longer welcome in the place I had poured my life into. The hallway stretched before me like a corridor of memory. On the left, framed photographs lined the wall, snapshots from 17 years of building a company I once believed in. There was the ribbon-cutting ceremony from our first international office, where I had stood proudly in the front row. A photo of the entire compliance team gathered around the table after we had survived a grueling audit, my hair shorter then, my eyes brighter, my smile unforced. Awards, certificates, glossy magazine spreads declaring us Innovators of the Year. Each image hit me like a quiet blow. I had built those moments, piece by piece, sacrifice by sacrifice. Now they hung like relics in a museum I was being escorted out of, a place where my presence had been rewritten to irrelevance. I held my head high, though my throat tightened with every step. If I let my shoulders sag, if I let even one tear fall, the humiliation would be complete. They had already taken my position, my voice in that room. I refused to let them take my dignity too. Halfway down the corridor, a voice called out from behind the velvet ropes where the press had been corralled. A reporter, holding a notepad and dictaphone, leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "Ms. Cross, why are you leaving at such a critical moment? Did something happen?" The question sliced through the hallway. I could feel every head turn, cameras tilting in my direction, waiting to capture a reaction. For a heartbeat, I thought of telling the truth that I had been discarded minutes before the largest signing in company history, That loyalty meant nothing when arrogance ruled. But I didn't. Instead, I let the corners of my lips curve into a calm, practiced smile. It wasn't warmth. It wasn't surrender. It was the only shield I had left. I gave him no words, no story to print, only silence wrapped in a faint smile. The murmur of disappointment followed me as the reporter leaned back, his question unanswered. At the end of the hallway stood the reception desk. Emily, the young receptionist I had quietly mentored when she first started, glanced up as I approached. Her eyes widened, shimmering with recognition and fear. I could see the gratitude she wanted to express, the farewell that trembled on her lips. She straightened, ready to speak only for her supervisor, standing a few feet away, to shake his head sharply. The silent command was clear: say nothing. Emily's lips pressed into a thin line, her hands tightening on the desk until her knuckles blanched. She lowered her gaze, and the unspoken goodbye dissolved between us. That moment, more than Hale's dismissal, hollowed me out. To be silenced was one thing, to see others silenced in fear was another. I kept moving, my heels clicking against the marble floor with steady precision. Behind me, the chatter of reporters grew fainter, swallowed by the distance. Ahead, the glass doors gleamed under the morning sun, promising freedom even as they underlined my exile. I pushed forward, spine straight, face composed. Inside, grief and rage roared, clawing to escape. But not here. Not now. Suppression was survival. They would not see me break. As the door slid open and the city's noise poured in, I stepped through with the faintest trace of a smile still fixed on my face, a mask of composure stretched over the fracture lines of betrayal. The city air hit my face as I stepped outside, cool against skin that still burned with humiliation. For a moment, I stood motionless, my reflection ghosting back at me in the lobby glass. Behind me, the company buzzed on, preparing for their grand signing as though I had never existed. Ahead, traffic surged, horns blaring, strangers rushing to lives where my loss meant nothing. And yet, beneath the humiliation, a flicker of something else stirred a buried reminder of who I was and what I had built. 17 years of work did not vanish with a single order to hand over my badge. The memory of it pressed against me, uninvited but insistent. I could see myself years earlier, hunched over a mountain of papers under the sterile glow of the office lights. Everyone else had gone home. The cleaning crew had vacuumed around me, their machines humming like distant bees. I had stayed, night after night, constructing the very backbone of our company's compliance framework. Those pages weren't glamorous. They weren't the kind of victories you could toast with champagne or capture in glossy annual reports. They were clauses, subclauses, cross-references, dense blocks of language meant to protect against fraud and collapse. It was work most executives dismissed as background noise. I had been told, more than once. Elin, nobody reads to the end. Just fill it in and move on. I still remember the sting of laughter echoing in that room when one of the junior attorneys leaned back in his chair and smirked. Who in their right mind will ever flip through to page 47, his voice carried, drawing chuckles from the others who were eager to leave early. It's just paperwork. Nobody cares. I hadn't answered him. Not then. I had kept writing, my pen steady even as bitterness pressed hard against my ribs. That night, as the office emptied and the city outside glittered in indifference, I understood something they never would power doesn't always live on the first page. Sometimes it hides in the lines no one bothers to read. Still, bitterness had its cost. I can see it clearly now. That single evening when sacrifice carved itself into my personal life, it was our wedding anniversary, 20 years with the man who had once believed in me when I barely believed in myself. We had planned dinner, reservations at the little French restaurant where we'd first gone as broke newlyweds. I had promised I'd be there, but when the phone buzzed at 8 o'clock with his gentle reminder, I silenced it. By 9, when he sent another "Are you on your way?" I typed back a hurried apology. By 10. I had lost the courage even to respond. I stayed at my desk until midnight, drafting the clauses that would one day become our company's fortress. At home, the table had been set with candles that burned low, waiting for someone who never came. That memory is a wound that has never fully healed, even now. Standing outside the building that discarded me, the regret of that night stings as sharply as Hale's dismissal. And yet, threaded through the regret is something else: quiet pride. Because those same clauses, ridiculed and ignored, were mine. They bore my name, my sweat, my stubborn refusal to cut corners. The irony wasn't lost on me. They had laughed at the pages I wrote in solitude. They had dismissed my work as invisible, irrelevant, disposable. But deep inside, I knew the truth. The skeleton of the company rested on those words. And no matter how loudly Hale smiled for the cameras, the bones of his empire still bore my handwriting. Bitterness tightened in my chest as I turned from the glass, but pride steadied my spine. Let them scoff, let them forget. Words on page 47 would not forget me. The television mounted in the corner of the cafe flickered with the live broadcast. The boardroom looked immaculate on screen-polished wood, gleaming glass walls, investors lined in perfect rows, cameras flashed with relentless intensity, each burst of light marking the beginning of the company's grandest moment, the signing of a $1.3 billion deal. I sat by the window, the muted chatter of strangers around me fading into the background. My eyes stayed fixed on the screen. I knew every inch of that room, every pattern in the carpet, every angle chosen to impress the press. I had orchestrated those details myself over the years, making sure the company's image appeared seamless. Now I was only an outsider, a spectator in a cafe a block away, watching a world I had built continue without me. On the screen, a ripple of applause filled the room as the new figure arrived. She walked with a confidence she hadn't earned, sliding into the leather chair that had been mine. My chair. The same seat where I had weathered midnight crises, where I had negotiated terms clause by clause, where I had shielded the company from collapse. Today, she filled the frame with a radiant smile, basking in the glow of flashbulbs as though the work had always been hers. The ache inside me was sharper than the moment Hale dismissed me. Losing a job was one thing. Watching yourself replaced, erased, was something else entirely. Authority, I knew, was built in years of uncelebrated sacrifice, in quiet victories that never made headlines. But perception was louder. In that room, perception had crowned her the face of success. While I sat in silence with my coffee cooling untouched, I couldn't look away. The cameras lingered on her smile, the caption beneath her name boldly declaring her role, lead negotiator. My title, rewritten without hesitation, as if 17 years could be overwritten with a single broadcast graphic. Then, a moment of disruption. The cafe's television carried the sound of a reporter leaning toward his colleague, his words caught by a live mic. Strange, isn't it? Why is Cross missing from the table? The words pierced through the noise, a splinter of recognition that made my breath hitch. Someone noticed. Someone out there remembered that my absence wasn't just a missing body, it was a missing history. His colleague muttered a reply, but the words were drowned in the surge of camera shutters and applause. Still, that single question mattered. It told me I wasn't entirely invisible. Not yet. I glanced around the cafe. The barista was pouring milk for a customer. 2 students hunched over laptops, an older man reading his newspaper. None of them knew the woman on the television had once been me, had once held the authority now claimed by a stranger's smile. To them, I was just another anonymous face in a blazer. The anonymity cut deep, but it also steadied me, because I knew what they didn't. I knew the framework beneath that contract, the words buried deep in clauses no one ever bothered to read. I knew that the empire they were celebrating on screen still rested on foundations I had written by hand. I pushed the half-finished coffee aside and rose from my chair. Let them celebrate. Let them flash their cameras and hand my seat to someone else. A smile could play to the crowd, but a smile could not sign what mattered most. And when the truth hidden in those pages surfaced, no caption, no broadcast, and no replacement would be able to erase me. Do you feel the weight of what Elin is going through right now? Stay with me until the end. You'll want to see how this story turns. The boardroom glittered, as if it were the stage of a theater. The air charged with anticipation. Cameras clicked in rapid succession, capturing every detail: the polished oak table, the embossed folders, the neat lines of pens laid out like silver instruments of history. Nathan Hale sat at the head of it all, basking in the glow as though the light itself belonged to him. He leaned back in his chair, smoothed his tie, and gave the crowd a smile that belonged more to a performance than a negotiation. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice resonant, carefully pitched for the microphones hidden in the corners. "This is a moment years in the making, and we are ready. We are more than ready. The company has prepared perfectly." The words floated across the room, landing with the weight of inevitability. Murmurs of approval followed, as though no one dared question a man so certain of his own invincibility. He reached for the Mont Blanc pen, gleaming beside the stack of contracts. His movements were deliberate, dramatic, the practiced choreography of a man who had waited his whole life for this scene. The camera zoomed closer. Hale placed the nib on the crisp paper of the first page and signed his name with a flourish, dragging the ink across the lines with an almost theatrical precision. He paused to let the moment sink in. Then, without hesitation, he stood, raised a tall glass of champagne prepared by an assistant, and lifted it high. "To the future," he declared, his voice booming. "To the deal that proves we are unstoppable. The world will remember this day." Applause thundered through the room. Glasses clinked. Voices rose. Investors leaned toward one another with grins that promised profits, for a fleeting instant. The atmosphere was electric, almost intoxicating. To anyone watching, it looked like triumph incarnate. But not everyone was swept up in the spectacle. Near the far end of the table, a younger investor glanced at his watch, his brow furrowed, just slightly, as he leaned toward the colleague beside him. "Too fast," he whispered, his voice low enough to be swallowed by the applause. They didn't even review the clauses properly. His words fell like a pebble into an ocean, unnoticed in the roar of celebration. The cameras missed it. The journalists scribbling notes didn't hear, but the unease lingered, a shadow beneath the glare of the champagne glow. Hale, oblivious, soaked in the moment, he turned toward the press gallery, teeth flashing in a smile that seemed carved from marble. Reporters snapped away, their shutters creating a staccato symphony. He loved it: the spotlight, the performance, the certainty that nothing could touch him. Behind the arrogance, though, the cracks were already visible to anyone who dared look closely. The champagne glasses trembled in hands that had not yet read every page. The applause masked the faint shuffle of attorneys flipping faster through their packets, a nervous tick disguised as diligence. Hale either didn't notice or didn't care. He tapped the rim of his glass against the table, commanding silence once more. "This company is untouchable," he said with conviction. "And today proves it. We are flawless." The words hung in the air, heavy with the kind of pride that dares the world to disagree, a pride so blinding it missed the details lurking in the margins, the words no one had bothered to read, the hidden trap that would surface soon enough, from the cafe across the street. I watched it all unfold on the television screen. I saw his smile, his toast, the applause erupting like a storm. To the world, he looked like a conqueror, but to me, the arrogance was almost painful to witness. I knew the truth: victory claimed too early is the surest path to downfall. I sat back in my chair, a quiet observer of the empire Hale believed was invincible. Let him toast, let him drink to his imagined perfection. He had signed the first page with flourish, but the page that mattered, the one that bore my name, still waited in silence. The applause had barely died down when the shuffle of papers began. Attorneys leaned over their copies of the contract, flipping through page after page as cameras continued to flash. Most were simply skimming for show. But one man, a junior associate seated near the middle, took his task more seriously. His tie was slightly askew, his hands restless. He turned the pages faster than the others, his brow furrowing the deeper he went. Then his fingers froze. The number at the top of the page read 47. He blinked once, twice, as though making sure his eyes weren't betraying him. His lips parted, but no sound came. Finally, with a voice that cracked under the weight of too many listening ears, he began to read. Clause 47. For any contractual instrument exceeding 1 billion dollars. His words trembled, echoing into the sudden hush that fell across the boardroom. Legal execution requires the attestation of the original compliance architect. A ripple went through the room. Chairs creaked, heads turned, and then the screen at the front of the boardroom flickered. The projector, synced to the attorney's copy, enlarged the text for everyone to see. And there it was, printed in black and white signature, required Elin Cross for a heartbeat. Silence reigned. Cameras captured the moment perfectly. Nathan Hale's smile faltering, investors leaning forward. The young lawyer's hands shaking as he pointed at the words from across the street. I watched it unfold on the cafe television, my own name glowing on the screen as though it had been waiting all these years for this precise moment. My breath caught. I had written those words late at night, pens scratching across the margins, while others mocked the redundancy of extra clauses. Now, they stood like a sentinel, demanding to be heard. Inside the boardroom, the reaction fractured into chaos. The communications team scrambled first. One of the staff at the control booth tried to cut the feed from the projector, his fingers flying over the laptop. The screen blinked, dimmed, then returned too late. By then, half the reporters had already captured the projected text on their cameras. Worse, a live stream camera still rolling from the corner caught every frame and broadcast it unedited to thousands of viewers online. Kill that screen, one PR director hissed, her voice carrying too loudly, but the damage had spread faster than she realized. Comments were already flooding the live chat. Who is Elin Cross? Why does her name matter? Why isn't she there, at the table? Hale's hand tightened around the stem of his champagne glass until his knuckles went white. He leaned toward the young attorney, his voice low. Dangerous. Skip it. Move on. The lawyer swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. Sir, I can't. It's written clearly. The clause states enough. Hale snapped, the word cracking across the room like a whip. But even as he spoke, investors were leaning back, exchanging nervous looks. A few whispered in languages Hale didn't understand, shaking their heads. The gleam of certainty that had filled the room minutes earlier was dissolving into unease. In the press section, one journalist whispered to another, "That's not a typo. That's binding. Without her, the deal collapses." Pens scratched furiously across notebooks. Microphones caught fragments of disbelief. From the cafe, I could almost feel the tension pressing through the glass of the television. It was the kind of tension that begins quietly, a thread pulled from a fabric that looks solid until the unraveling is undeniable. The projector flickered again as the communications team finally cut the feed, plunging the screen into darkness. But it was pointless. The image had already escaped. The world had seen my name, bold and immovable, in a contract they had all assumed was airtight. I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding, lips curved into the faintest shadow of a smile. They could scramble, deny, even shout, but the truth had already taken root. Page 47 had spoken. The words still lingered in the air when the room fell utterly still. It wasn't the kind of silence that comes with order or respect. It was the brittle, fragile kind, the silence of a structure cracking beneath its own weight. You could hear the smallest sounds, the faint hum of the projector cooling down, the click of a pen dropped nervously onto the table, even the uneven breathing of the young attorney who had dared to read the clause aloud. For a moment, no one moved, dozens of eyes fixed on the same line. The signature block projected just seconds earlier. The name Elin Cross branded across their collective memory. All the power and swagger that had filled the boardroom minutes ago drained away. The deal, the spectacle, the champagne, it all seemed to teeter on the edge of collapse. A chair creaked as one of the international investors leaned forward. His accent cut cleanly through the stillness. "Where is Ms. Cross?" The question was sharp, unyielding, not an idle curiosity, but a demand. Heads turned instantly to Hale. His face, which had basked in cameras only moments earlier, now looked pale and rigid. He opened his mouth, closed it again, as if language itself had abandoned him. At the far end of the table, the company's chief legal officer cleared her throat, her hand trembling as she adjusted her glasses. "This clause, well, it's old," she stammered. "Outdated. Perhaps, in practice, it could be bypassed." Her voice faltered, eyes darting nervously across the table as if searching for approval. The international investor's lips pressed into a thin, unimpressed line. He shook his head slowly. "Bypassed? No. Not with this sum, not with this visibility, without her signature. This document has no force." His words were final, and the other delegates nodded, murmuring in agreement. The silence thickened. You could almost taste the unease in the air, metallic and bitter. Reporters in the gallery exchanged glances, pens scratching faster, microphones angling closer. The cameras no longer framed Hale as a triumphant leader. They captured him cornered, diminished, caught in a net of his own making. Hale's jaw tightened. He tried to gather himself, but his voice betrayed the crack beneath his facade. "We can resolve this," he insisted. "The clause is nothing more than legal dust, symbolic. It doesn't change the essence of the contract." But the room had already shifted. Essence didn't matter here. Legitimacy did. One of the European investors tapped the page with a manicured nail. "Symbolic, you are negotiating with sovereign wealth, with funds that answer to parliaments and prime ministers. Symbolic signatures do not exist in our world. We require enforceable law. Without Ms. Cross, you have nothing." The impact was seismic. Those few sentences ripped through the illusion Hale had so carefully crafted. The weight of 17 years of my work, once mocked as excessive detail, now bore down like an unmovable stone. From my seat in the cafe, I watched the broadcast unfold. The television volume was low, but I didn't need to hear every word. The body language said enough. Investors leaning back, their trust evaporating, attorneys whispering frantically. Hale, suddenly small in a chair that had always seemed too large for anyone but him, inside the boardroom. No one dared clap anymore. The champagne glasses stood half raised, forgotten. The young attorney who had read page 47 sat frozen, eyes darting as if wishing he could rewind the moment. But there was no rewinding. The clause had been spoken, the silence broken by the investor's question, and nothing could unmake it. "Where is Ms. Cross?" The words echoed still, louder in repetition than in the first utterance. And with every repetition, the truth grew heavier. She was not in that room, and because of that, neither was the deal. For all his arrogance, Hale could not command silence this time. The silence had turned against him, filling the room like an accusation. And in that silence, the empire he thought untouchable began to unravel. One breath at a time, the silence broke like glass under weight. Nathan Hale slammed his palm against the table, the sound ricocheting through the boardroom like a gunshot. Champagne flutes rattled, pens rolled across contracts, and several of the attorneys jumped in their seats. His carefully rehearsed composure had evaporated. All that remained was fury barely cloaked as authority. "Find her!" he barked, his voice hoarse but loud. "Now! I want Alan Cross in this building immediately." His eyes darted across the room, wild and frantic, searching for anyone to move quickly enough to undo what had just been exposed. The young attorney, who had read page 47, flinched as Hale's gaze landed on him. The poor man shook his head, as if to say it wasn't his fault, his lips forming silent apologies. Hale turned instead toward Claire from HR, who sat frozen near the corner with her folder clutched to her chest like a shield. "Why?" Hale growled, leaning toward her with venom. Was she dismissed this morning? Why today, of all days? The question cut deeper than it seemed. The timing had not only been cruel, it had been catastrophic. Claire stammered, her face pale, words tumbling out like broken glass. It was protocol. "Sir, you asked me to protocol." Hale's voice cracked into a shout. "You cost us everything. Do you understand that everything?" The investors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One of the international delegates stood abruptly, pushing his chair back with a sharp scrape. He leaned toward a colleague, his voice low but audible in the heavy air. "We will not wait much longer. If this is not resolved immediately, we walk." The threat hung like a guillotine blade over the table. Hale straightened, beads of sweat shining on his temple under the glare of the lights. He tried to rally himself, raising a trembling hand as though to calm the room. "This is a misunderstanding," he said, his tone wobbling between authority and desperation. "We can fix this. We will fix this." No one is walking away. But the room was no longer his to command. The translators whispered into headsets, relaying the chaos in clipped, urgent tones. Lawyers shuffled papers not to find solutions, but to avoid Hale's gaze. Reporters scribbled furiously, aware that every moment captured here would spill into headlines within the hour. One of the European investors tapped his watch pointedly, his lips tightening into a thin line. Another investor leaned back, arms crossed, his expression carved in skepticism. The applause and celebration of minutes earlier now felt like an illusion, fragile. Cheap, already shattered. Claire from HR shrank into her chair, unable to meet Hale's glare. "I only did as I was told," she whispered. But the words did nothing to soften the fury radiating from him. Hale's fist slammed down again. "Then undo it," he roared. "Bring her back! I don't care how! Call security, call legal, call whoever you must. I want her in this room." The desperation in his voice betrayed him. He no longer sounded like the man who had boasted of perfection, who had raised his champagne with arrogant certainty. He sounded like a man whose empire was crumbling faster than he could catch it. From the press gallery, whispers grew. Microphones picked up fragments. CEO lashes out at staff. Investors threatened to walk. Contract in jeopardy. The spectacle he had intended as triumph was unraveling in real time, streamed across the world with no way to control it. Across the street. I sat in the cafe, my coffee long gone cold, watching his panic broadcast onto the television above the counter. His face was red, his movements erratic, his mask stripped away, for the first time in 17 years. Nathan Hale looked small, and though I remained silent, unseen, I felt the shift as surely as those inside that boardroom did. The man who thought he commanded everything was now being commanded by fear. The boardroom dissolved into chaos the moment Hale barked his command. Staff bolted from their chairs, rushing toward the double doors, their polished shoes clattering across marble floors. The sound echoed down the corridors like a storm breaking loose. Elin Cross. Her name was shouted into empty hallways, into elevators, even into restrooms where startled employees looked up in confusion. Panic sharpened every voice. It wasn't just a search, it was a hunt, frantic and desperate, because the deal their future hung on a signature no one could provide except me. Assistants stormed the reception desk. "Has Ms. Cross left? Did anyone see her?" they demanded. Leaning over the counter, the receptionist, pale and nervous, hesitated before answering. "She walked out a few minutes ago. I I didn't stop her. The fear in her voice was palpable. Knowing she was speaking a truth that could collapse an empire, security guards were pulled into the frenzy, radios crackling with urgent orders. Find Cross. Check the lobby. Check the side exits. She cannot be off the premises. Guards scattered, scanning badge logs, peering into parking garages, their dark uniforms weaving through the polished architecture of the building, but the trail was already cold. On the 27th floor, a manager leaned out of his office, startled as staff sprinted past. "What's going on?" he asked. But no one paused long enough to explain. The hunt moved like a wave, flooding every corridor with shouts of my name. And then came the call over the radio that stopped them all, control to boardroom. Cross has exited the building. Badge deactivated at 9:13. Left her ID on the conference table. The words spread like a contagion. Faces blanched, hands froze mid-motion. They had lost me. I was gone. In the boardroom, Hale's fury collided with disbelief. He slammed his fist down so hard the crystal glasses trembled. "You let her leave," he thundered. Claire from HR shrank in her seat. "She's outside, sir. We can still bring her back, but before she could finish." A voice from the press gallery cut through. A journalist had his phone raised high. Live stream running as he narrated the spectacle. Breaking news. He whispered urgently into the mic. CEO Nathan Hale lost control during a billion-dollar signing. Elin Cross, the key signatory, has left the building. The screen behind him lit with comments from viewers tuning in around the world. Unbelievable. How does a CEO forget this? The arrogance is showing. Joe. And then, bold at the top of the stream, the headline began to spread. CEO lost his way in the middle of the $1.3 billion signing ceremony. Hale heard it, saw the words flash across a journalist's screen, and his face drained of color. What was once supposed to be his crowning moment was now being broadcast live as a catastrophe. Inside the building, the search continued half-heartedly, the energy shifting from urgency to dread. Staff scoured elevators and stairwells. But with every passing second, the truth grew heavier. I was beyond their reach. From across the street, I sat quietly in the cafe, my reflection blending into the window as I watched the commotion unfold through the television and through the glass facade of the tower itself. Men and women in dark suits darted through lobbies and hallways, their panic visible even from a distance. I didn't move. I didn't need to. The harder they chased, the more the world saw their desperation. The live streams carried every frantic moment, every shouted order, every fragment of Hale's unraveling composure. For years, I had walked those halls with steady steps, invisible to cameras, ignored by executives who thought details didn't matter. Now, the entire building screamed my name, while the world watched their humiliation broadcast in real time. The lobby was a cathedral of glass and steel, its marble floors reflecting the morning light that streamed through towering windows. Employees moved in hurried knots, whispering in anxious tones, while reporters pressed against the revolving doors, their cameras raised like weapons. The air itself seemed to buzz with anticipation, as though everyone present sensed they were about to witness something no headline could ever fully capture. And then he appeared, Nathan Hale, the man who had strutted into that boardroom only an hour earlier with champagne confidence, now stumbled into the lobby with desperation clinging to him like a second skin. His face was flushed, his tie loosened, his polished shoes scuffing against the marble as though even the floor had turned against him. He scanned the crowd, wild-eyed, until his gaze found me. "Elin!" he called out, his voice breaking, echoing in the cavernous space. "Elin, please, come back. The company needs you." For a moment, the lobby froze, conversations halted, footsteps stilled. Every employee, every guard, every intern waiting for an elevator turned to watch the spectacle. Their CEO, the man who had dismissed me without hesitation at 8:59 a.m., now stood visibly trembling, his authority stripped bare, pleading with the woman he had discarded. My name, once spoken with disdain in closed-door meetings, now carried a different weight. Please, not command. Desperation, not arrogance. Across the lobby, a journalist raised his camera, the red recording light glowing. He zoomed in, capturing every line of Hale's face as he reached out, his hand trembling slightly as if he could pull me back with sheer will. The lens drank in the scene, the power dynamic inverted, the balance shattered. Within seconds, the feed streamed live to thousands, then tens of thousands of viewers across the world. Elin Hale's voice cracked again. Louder this time. We cannot do this without you. Please sign it. Just sign it. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. A murmur rippled through the employees gathered near the reception desk. Only days ago, Hale had mocked my insistence on details, had told the board my role was support, not leadership. Now, stripped of control, he begged for the very authority he had dismissed as expendable. One young analyst whispered to a colleague, too loudly in the stillness, he's begging her. In the lobby, after firing her, another employee, older, folded his arms across his chest and shook his head in disbelief. 17 years. And this is how it turns, he muttered. The moment stretched, taut as a wire. Hale stepped closer, his polished shoes clicking unevenly against the marble, his voice trembling. I was wrong, he admitted, though the words came ragged, torn from a throat unused to apology. You were right. You always were. The investors, they're leaving. The deal, it will die without you. Please. Elin, come back inside. I stood near the glass doors, my coat draped over one arm, the city's sunlight spilling across my shoulders like a quiet halo. For years, I had dreamed of hearing those words from him. Recognition, admission, vindication. But not like this. Not dragged from his mouth by fear of collapse. Not broadcast to the world as a last-ditch attempt to save himself. The journalist's camera tilted, capturing me in the frame now, the silent figure who had once been invisible in the company's narrative. Suddenly revealed as the axis on which everything turned. The footage spread instantly. The CEO begs ex-employee in public lobby. Comments exploded online. Live captions rewriting Hale's legacy in real time. Employees by the elevators exchanged shocked glances. Some lowered their heads, ashamed they had not stood by me. Others stared openly, unable to process the sight of their CEO brought so low. Even the security guards shifted uncomfortably, uncertain if they were witnessing the end of a career or the collapse of an empire. Hale's knees seemed to buckle slightly as he took another step forward, his voice nearly a whisper now. Elin, please. The silence that followed was deafening. You could hear the hum of the lobby's air vents, the faint shuffle of someone adjusting their stance, even the deliberate click of the journalist's camera as it froze the moment forever. There he was, the man who had believed himself untouchable, bent in front of me, stripped of dignity, pleading for salvation. And there I was, the woman he had discarded, holding nothing but silence, watching the story of his downfall write itself in real time. I didn't move, and in my stillness, the whole building seemed to understand the balance of power had shifted, and it would never tilt back in his favor again. The revolving glass doors loomed ahead of me, sunlight spilling through them in fractured beams. My steps slowed as I reached the threshold, the weight of 17 years pressing against my shoulders one last time. Behind me, the lobby was thick with silence, every eye fixed on me, every breath suspended. I paused, turning slightly. I let my gaze settle on Nathan Hale. He stood only yards away, his chest heaving, his eyes wild with desperation. The man who once dismissed me with a flick of arrogance now looked hollow, his authority leaking from him like air from a punctured balloon. For a moment, our eyes locked his, begging, mine. steady and calm. No words passed between us. There was nothing left to say. Words had been wasted on him long ago, buried under years of dismissal, of credit stolen, of sacrifices ignored. My silence was sharper than any accusation I could voice. And then, without breaking eye contact, I turned, one step, then another, and I pressed my palm against the revolving glass door. It moved with a steady rhythm, carrying me forward, out, away. The glass curved around me, enclosing me in a sphere of quiet as I crossed the threshold. Behind me, chaos erupted. Elin, Hale's voice cracked through the space. I heard his shoes scrape violently against the marble as he lunged toward me, his desperation spilling into clumsy motion. He tried to follow, to push through the same revolving door, but the security system responded instantly. His badge, still active, jammed against the sensor. The door froze mid-turn, trapping him half inside, half out, for a brief, almost comical moment. The great Nathan Hale stood wedged against the glass, powerless against the very system he claimed to control. Gasps rippled through the lobby. The journalists' cameras clicked furiously, recording every second of his humiliation. The live stream captions rolled across screens in real time. CEO blocked while ex-employee walks free. But I didn't turn back. I didn't need to. From the corner of the lobby, I caught the sound of muffled sobbing. The receptionist, the same young woman who had once greeted me every morning with a smile, now sat with her hands trembling against her lips. Tears streaked down her face as she whispered to no one in particular. Though the words carried, "She built this place," not him. The honesty of it cracked through the room like thunder. Employees glanced at one another, shame flickering across faces. They had known it, somewhere deep down. They had watched me stitch this company together through long nights and invisible sacrifices. And yet, they had stayed silent as Hale paraded his arrogance. Hearing it spoken aloud, raw and unguarded, forced them to face the truth. I stepped out into the open air. The city greeted me with its noise, the honk of taxis, the murmur of pedestrians, the distant hum of construction. For the first time in years, the sounds didn't drown me. They lifted me. Each footstep on the pavement was a release, each breath a reclamation. Inside the lobby, Hale shouted again, but his words blurred into the background noise. He could scream. He could plead. He could thrash against the glass like a man drowning, but I was already gone. I did not look back. The revolving door spun me into the sunlight, and with every turn of the glass, the weight of 17 years fell away. My silence was not weakness. It was strength. The final verdict. The undeniable truth written not in ink, but in absence. The company would remember this moment. The world would remember the image of Hale trapped and begging while I walked away. And when page 47 rose again in courtrooms and boardrooms, it would be my name, not his. That carried weight. I crossed the street, the cafe still in view, the television still broadcasting the chaos I had left behind. For once. I didn't need to watch. The story was already written, and it no longer belonged to him. The next morning, the world awoke to my name. Newspapers, news sites, and financial tickers blazed with the same headline, 1.3B deal frozen over forgotten signature clause. The photo chosen again and again was the same Nathan Hale in the lobby, pale and desperate, his arm outstretched toward me while I stood by the revolving door. It wasn't staged, it wasn't polished, it wasn't filtered. It was raw, undeniable truth captured in a single frame. The man who believed himself untouchable, brought low. Undone not by an enemy, but by the very arrogance that led him to discard me. Screens lit up around the globe, from New York to Tokyo. Investors saw Hale's face drained of power. Networks replayed the clip on loop. Journalists dissecting every detail of page 47. Every phrase I had once been mocked for writing. What had been dismissed as paperwork now carried the weight of a hammer striking down. And through it all, I felt calm. I sat at the same cafe across from the tower, the steam from a fresh cup of coffee rising steadily, the morning sunlight warming my shoulders. The chaos belonged to them now, not me, for 17 years. I had carried the burden of their oversight, their dismissals, their careless shortcuts. Today, that burden was gone. My phone buzzed on the table. An email notification. I opened it to find a letter with an embossed header I knew well, our fiercest competitor. The words were direct, formal, and yet almost reverent. We have followed your work for years. After yesterday, there is no question of your vision or your integrity. We would be honored to discuss an executive role at the highest level. Name your terms. I exhaled slowly, a smile tugging at the corner of my lips. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about recognition. Not the hollow kind handed out for show, but the real kind that acknowledged sacrifice, diligence, foresight. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, I realized the doors opening in front of me weren't prison gates, they were freedom. Another buzz. This time, a text message. The sender was an old colleague, someone who had once leaned on me during crises, but had lowered his head in silence when Hale humiliated me. The message was short, but it carried the weight of everything left unsaid. We stayed silent too long. Thank you for letting the truth speak. I stared at the words, feeling both the sting of their honesty and the quiet warmth of solidarity. I had walked out of that building alone, but I hadn't been entirely unseen. Silence had its own guilt, and they were beginning to face it. Across the street, the tower loomed, its glass walls reflecting the morning sun. It was still standing. Yes, but now everyone knew its foundations were cracked. Not because of me, but because of the arrogance that tried to erase me. And yet, I felt no bitterness as I looked at it, only release. For years, I had imagined this moment, some grand vindication, some dramatic scene where I delivered the final word. But the truth was simpler. My greatest revenge had been silence, patience, and the careful clause on page 47. My greatest reward was not their collapse, but my freedom. I closed my laptop, slid my phone into my bag, and stood. The cafe door chimed as I pushed it open. Stepping into the steady flow of the city, the noise didn't feel overwhelming anymore. It felt alive. The day was mine, unchained from the weight of 17 years, carried by the simple truth that I had built something indestructible, my own resilience. I didn't need Hale's recognition. I didn't need the board's applause. I didn't even need the cameras. The world had already seen, and I had already let go. We often stay silent when we're underestimated, waiting for others to see what we've carried all along. But sometimes the quietest line, buried on page 47, can change everything. If it struck a chord with you, leave a comment, tap the like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories of justice, resilience, and the strength we carry when no one is watching.